A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is great to have you with us because it's always great to have you with us, but I'm especially glad today because you are going to be keeping me company. It is another all-email edition of the program. We're going to get your thoughts on Second Amendment sanctuaries, on Facebook's new ban, which includes Instagram, on branded content from Second Amendment influencers, branded content from firearms manufacturers, ammunition manufacturers, and a couple of other topics as well. But before we get started, do have one programming note that I want to mention. Next week is going to be the Christmas holiday. I am celebrating by wearing my shirt from, that bunny suit and that Red Ryder BB gun. Might look a little familiar. It's kind of sad that I actually have to lift up the beard now so you can actually see the shirt. Sad or cool, depending on how you look at it. Anyway, next week is going to be Christmas. I do wish you and yours a very Merry Christmas. I will wait to wish you a Happy New Year, but the holiday season is a wonderful time. Unless you have a show in which you are reliant on guests, in which case it sucks. It is really difficult to try to find folks to come on the program while they're enjoying the Christmas holidays or spending time with their family. So this program that you're watching right now is going to be the last Bearing Arms, Cam and Company until December 30th. My expectation right now is we'll have programs on December 30th, December 31st. We'll take off the 1st and probably be back on January 2nd with more Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. So we are going to be off next week. We will have fresh content, though, on the website each and every day at bearingarms.com. So make sure you visit so you get to keep up with the latest doings in the world of the right to keep and bear arms. All right. Also, before you get to some emails, I want to update a story that appeared on the website Thursday. Cowards of the County, it was called, and it was about the vote in Amelia County, Virginia on Wednesday night, or before a crowd of about 800 people. The Board of Supervisors, I think, acted very disrespectfully towards the residents there. They ended up not voting on a Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. They voted on a resolution of support for the Second Amendment, but not declare the county to be a Second Amendment sanctuary. There was nothing in there about not spending public funds, enforcing unconstitutional gun laws. It was a watered-down version of the Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions that have been passed around the state. It's also not the only county that has passed a watered-down resolution. What really bothered me about it was how it all went down. The fact that I didn't see any written copies of the resolution passed out to any of the folks in attendance. The sound was cutting in and out. I think a lot of folks had a hard time hearing the language of the resolution. There were no comments that were allowed to be made before or after. Well, before the vote was taken, there was no public comments. And then as soon as the vote was taken, there was a quick recess and most of the crowd left. I felt like even if this is the way the county wanted to go and the way the supervisors wanted to go, that there was a better way, a more honest way of going about it. So I've reached out to the supervisors. As of the time of this broadcast, I'm going to check my email actually while we are recording here. I have reached out to the supervisors on a couple of occasions. I heard back from one of them who said that they had referred my questions to the county administrator. And I have yet to hear back from the county administrator there in Amelia County. I have, on the other hand, talked to a couple of gun owners in Amelia County, and I want to let you know what they had to say. Both of these individuals were at that meeting on Wednesday night. One had absolutely no idea that the resolution that had been voted on was not a Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. He really was kind of bothered by that. In fact, he was pretty upset. He did feel misled. I talked to another individual, also a gun owner, also in attendance at the meeting on Wednesday night, who was aware that the resolution that was passed was not an official Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. And he was not as upset. His point of view was that based on the makeup of the supervisors, who's on the board, what their political ideologies are, that this was probably the best that the county was going to get. And his point of view was, he is disappointed. He feels like he wishes the language of the resolution was stronger. And in fact, when I asked, do you think that the language that was approved is representative of the feelings of gun owners in Amelia County? And he said no. He said, I think it needs to be, it should have been stronger. But again, at the same time, he says he thinks this is the best that could have been done. And I don't want to take away from any of the work that the gun owners in Amelia County did to bring this forward. My only issue, well, I had two issues. I did have an issue with the language of the resolution. I too believe it should have been stronger. But my biggest issue is just how this was handled. Because I really, having been to 10 of these boards of supervisors meetings around the state, I've seen how various boards of supervisors have conducted their meetings. And clearly, some of them I think have been more enthusiastic than others. But I just felt like, so I was in Prince Edward County, Farmville, Virginia, where their vote was held on Tuesday night. And at Prince Edward County's Board of Supervisors meeting, there were two different versions that were brought up for a vote. There was option A, which was the Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. There was option B, which was almost identical to what Amelia County passed. It was a watered-down version. Folks in the crowd got to read both of those proposals, and they got to sound off on both of those proposals. And then the board voted on both of those proposals. Thankfully, the Second Amendment sanctuary language passed. That's the one that got approved. And I would have been disappointed had option B, had the watered down language passed in Prince Edward County. But at least that process respected the residents. And so, one of the gun owners I talked to in Amelia County yesterday said that, these are good guys, the supporters. He said they've been sort of, ground down by a couple of other board members. And he said, he just didn't know if they had the fight in them. He said, but they're good guys. Have lived good lives. Some of them have served this country honorably in the military. And so again, if you're in Amelia County and you're happy with what happened, okay. I don't live in Amelia County. And the Second Amendment sanctuary movement is so hyper-local that even somebody like me who lives a couple of counties away is sort of an interloper in the county's business. I understand that. But looking at this at a statewide level, at a 50,000-foot level, we need supervisors and sheriffs and Commonwealth's attorneys who are willing to take this stand and willing to engage. And I understand that a lot of county supervisors may not have run for office with the hopes of dealing with controversial issues. And most of the time they don't have to. Or the controversial issue is a new traffic light or whether or not they're going to approve a new development. This is deeper. This is bigger. This is a matter of Virginians turning out by the hundreds and thousands to ask their county officials to take a stand in defense of their constitutional rights. I understand that it might be uncomfortable for some of these politicians. Might not be what they signed up for. But it is what the times demand. Plain and simple. So we can have good people, people who give back to the community, people who care very deeply about the Second Amendment, and they can not vote the way we want them to, and I think the way we need them to. That doesn't make them a bad person. But in my opinion, it also doesn't make them the right person for the job at hand. So, again, I wanted to provide that extra bit of context from what I learned from gun owners in Amelia County, that this is not perhaps as cut and dried as it may appear to be on the outside. But again, I have to tell you, even having learned those extra details, my position still is that I believe that the Board of Supervisors in Amelia County could have and should have handled it differently. Even if the ultimate vote was going to be this watered down resolution that passed, the process could have been done differently to show more respect for the residents there of Amelia County, to make sure that they were more informed about what the board was doing. And moving forward, again, we have to ensure that our elected officials, we talked about this yesterday with David Campbell from Effingham County, we have to make sure that our elected officials are up to the job. And that means using the power of the ballot box. And so those 800 individuals in Amelia County, next time there's a Board of Supervisors election, you need to make sure that the folks who are first of all running, and then the folks who get elected, are going to be up to the task. And again, around the country and around the state of Virginia, we have men and women serving in public office who absolutely are, and who are taking that stand in support of gun owners. And I appreciate each and every one of them for doing it. All right, let's get to some emails now, shall we? I want to take care of that. All right, so I asked a question yesterday about this new policy from Facebook, Instagram that bans branded content from influencers or users who are posting about firearms. Now, this is not the only category. I think they're going after vaping, and they're banning vaping as well, or branded content regarding vaping. Vaping is not a constitutional right. Gun ownership is. Facebook, Instagram, obviously private companies. They can do what they want. But as I said at Bearing Arms yesterday, they're private companies, but they are, in effect, operating the public square now. Facebook got an absolutely enormous reach. Instagram not far behind. And so what is the answer? I see these policies get introduced, and I see the harm that is going to come to the Second Amendment, to the firearms community as a result. And there is a part of me that says, well, maybe we do need to have the government step in here. And then immediately the little, bureaucrat on my shoulder says, we just screw things up in the government. So I don't know what the answer is. I asked you to let me know your thoughts, and we have a couple here. So Mark wrote in and said, is it not possible to start a Facebook-like platform for pro-Constitution, pro-freedom people that are anti-everything that Facebook stands for? It seems like we should have someone with greater abilities than mine. Supporters could send contributions to help build their own Facebook, just rambling on, hoping for a partial solution. And there have been a number of folks who have advocated the same. Alan wrote in, said, you can do what I already do. I don't use Facebook or Twitter. They're still there to make money, and if their advertising revenue drops off due to enough people no longer using them, they might get the message, or at least the advertising companies might. Also from, I'm not sure, let's call him V, says, join MeWe. They don't sell your info and allow you to post what you want. Johnson writing in says, we both agree it's time to ditch the Instagram, Facebook censorship squad. I've made the move to blockchain-based apps. They're very difficult to censor due to their decentralized architecture. I'm no tech expert, but he sent me a link to a few that he signed up for as a user. He says, let me know your thoughts. So here are my thoughts on this. And again, the easiest idea is, well, let's just find an alternative, or let's just start an alternative. And there are alternatives out there. The problem is that they don't have the reach that Facebook has. When I say that Facebook is the public square, I mean, Facebook is the public square. I do not typically use Facebook. I will post some of my stories from Bearing Arms to my Facebook page, but as a daily user of Facebook, I stopped probably, you go back through my timeline and find out, 3 or 4 years ago. It just became, it felt like a task to me. Not something that I really wanted to do, but something that I had to do. And so I quit because I don't like being told I have to do something. The problem is that for every person like me who says, whatever, not Facebook, there are literally 10,000 people who keep using it. So I have nothing against the idea of other apps or other programs, but we still have to deal with the fact that pretty much everybody is on Facebook. And that's why Facebook is so powerful. And a lot of individuals who don't care much about these issues, who may not use Facebook to post anything political at all, or to talk about their Second Amendment rights or even vaping, those individuals see nothing wrong with Facebook. So they're not going to leave. And I think for any other platform to become viable, it has to grow. Right? There are a couple of platforms, actually. There's one out there that I'm kind of curious about, and I apologize because I am blanking on the name of it. But it seems to combine sort of the best of all of these social media platforms. It's got a Facebook-like component. It's got a Instagram-like component. It's got a Twitter-like component. It's got a LinkedIn-like component. I worry that it maybe is trying to do too much. Again, I said at Bearing Arms that I don't have any easy answers, and I don't, because we do have alternatives out there. They just don't have the reach or the footprint that Facebook does and that Instagram does. So from a perspective of Facebook getting rid of, branded content from Second Amendment influencers, the folks who that is really going to hurt are, I think, the manufacturers, first and foremost, and secondarily, the influencers themselves. This is not something that advertisers can easily switch. They can't say, well, we're just going to, go fund this branded content on, these smaller platforms, because it doesn't have the reach. I mean, they can do that, and they very well might do that, but it doesn't. They're not going to have the ability to reach as many people as they do right now on Instagram and Facebook. Again, I wish that there was a easy solution. I think the ideal solution would be Facebook actually recognizes that the right to keep and bear arms is a constitutionally protected right, and to treat it as if it is some sort of taboo object, in my mind, is fundamentally un-American. However, it doesn't look like that is what Facebook is going to do, or the tack that they're going to take anytime soon. All right, let's get to some other topics here. Obviously, the Second Amendment sanctuary movement is still very much a big topic of concern. Heard from a gentleman in New York State. He said, I saw you on YouTube in New York. We've been dealing with this with a SAFE Act. He says, the same law once upheld by a federal district court in New York became the blueprint for the Democrat assault on the Second Amendment. Says the New York SAFE Act enjoys a 4% compliance rate, and they can't confiscate, he says, because they do not have a confiscation list. If they had the list, be sure they would kick doors and confiscate from everyone who did not surrender their firearms willingly after personal notification. Without a list, they cannot act. Universal background checks will generate their holy grail list. He says that's why they say if you like your AR-15, you can keep your AR-15 as long as you register it to our confiscation list. I think that there is something to that. Now, I would note that the SAFE Act was not one law. It was a package of gun control laws. And the 4% compliance rate that this gentleman refers to is referring to the registration of so-called assault weapons in New York State. That was the same deal. We're going to ban the sale of these guns going forward. You got to register your firearms with the state if you want to keep them. And again, it's estimated that there were about 4% compliance. Now, that was as of a couple of years ago. But the registration deadline's passed, so I can't imagine that the compliance rate has all of a sudden soared. It's not the only registration law that was a part of the New York SAFE Act. And the other registration law also saw widespread noncompliance. That was the requirement that handgun owners in New York State re-register their legally owned handguns that they had already registered with the state. Back in, so the deadline for this was 2018, end of January 2018. And in the months ahead of this, there were a bunch of news stories. You can go back and you can find them online, talking about 80,000, 100,000, 175,000 individuals who had not re-registered their handguns. And ultimately, the state police and Governor Cuomo said, well, we're going to extend the deadline a year. Maybe people didn't know about it. And then the story just sort of went away. When the deadline came around January 31st of this year, nobody was talking about it. Nobody was talking about, well, did everybody comply in the past 12 months? Did nobody comply? They just decided to let it drop. So there is a list. I don't know how accurate it is right now, but there is a list of, 100,000 New Yorkers. Maybe at this point, maybe it's 75,000, maybe it's even 50,000. But there's a list of tens of thousands of New York gun owners that the state knows the last place they lived, or at least a place they lived, know that they had registered to own a handgun and had not re-registered that handgun. So if Governor Cuomo really wanted to, he could use that list and he could go around every one of these homes and he could say, hey, do you have your re-registered firearm? But the governor won't do that. State police won't do it either. And that is, I think, ultimately one of the biggest checks on the abuse of power that we have. Is that ultimately these anti-gun politicians, including Don McEachin in Virginia, who called for Governor Northam to use the National Guard to enforce our gun control laws that are coming. Ultimately, I think even someone like Representative McEachin understands that in order to do that, you would turn free America on its head. And that there are a lot of Americans who are not gun owners who would not stand for that type of confiscation of otherwise legally possessed firearms. Not in New York State, not in Virginia. So instead you get this sort of piecemeal, paint by numbers approach, ban by numbers approach maybe. A generation from now, it's entirely possible that if we don't succeed, that the number of gun owners in this country will have declined to a point that we are a tiny fraction of the nation, that the Second Amendment will have, through the efforts of gun control activists and anti-gun politicians and the anti-gun media, they will have turned the exercise of a constitutional right into something that is not just frowned on as it is today, but something that is seen as grotesque. And so that the support for the Second Amendment declines to a fraction of what it is today. And then they could, I think, try to run roughshod over our rights. But I don't think they're there yet. Honestly, I really don't. I do not think the American people are there yet. And I hope that they never get there. So I'm not worried about mass confiscation of firearms in New York State or even in Virginia in the next 6 months. What I am worried about in Virginia in particular are laws that are put in place that are going to infringe on the rights of legal gun owners. And as individual gun owners, we could see thousands of Virginians subjected to an infringement of their rights if they are arrested and charged with violating these state gun control laws. But as of December 20th, 2019, I am not personally worried about Governor Ralph Northam giving an order in, let's say, January or February of next year for the National Guard to go out and start confiscating firearms. Repeat, I am not worried about that scenario. I don't think that it's going to happen. If I change my mind, if I see any signs that indicate that believe me, you'll be the first to know. But right now, I think that the threat is not quite as overt. It is a little more insidious, and they're going to try to take one bite at a time out of the right to keep and bear arms. All right, let's get to a couple of other emails here. This from Mr. Green Jeans. I like the name, Mr. Green Jeans. Says, Cam, the way I see the Virginia situation playing out is that Richmond will offer to grandfather all quote-unquote assault weapons but ban future ones. Governor Northam has already indicated that that's what he plans to do with Senate Bill 16, which would be a modification because right now there is no grandfather clause in that quote-unquote assault weapons ban legislation. Mr. Green Jean says, I'm afraid that this will cause the pro-2A fervor to cool just enough to render our movement powerless. And what I mean here is that I'm concerned that too many people would take grandfathering as an acceptable form of compromise and just put up with not being able to purchase these guns anymore. Such a result would surely doom gun rights in this state. What are your thoughts on this? All the best to you and your wife. Well, thank you, Mr. Green Jeans. I appreciate that. And I think that you're right to be concerned about this. But I am also optimistic. You know, one of the two gun owners from Amelia County that I spoke with yesterday, as we were talking, it was the gentleman who said, you know, listen, I think we got the best that we could get. This guy was actually pretty involved in advocating for a resolution to be brought forward. And he told me, he said, politics isn't my thing. He said, I vote. He said, but then I forget about, he said, I don't, that's where my involvement has stopped. I vote and then I go live my life. He said, I like cars. I like spending time with my daughter, like hanging out with my family. I got a life to live. I work. He said, I'm not an activist. He said, or at least I wasn't. And I asked him, I said, well, what made you change your mind? What made you decide that you had to do something that you don't ordinarily do? And he said, well, you know, the times demand it. He said, you look at all of these bills, and it wasn't just Senate Bill 16 that he rattled off. He said, you look at all of these bills, he said, this is really going to impact not just my right to keep bear arms, but my kids' rights. And what is their Second Amendment going to look like? And I have heard that from a number of gun owners across Virginia when I've been going out to these meetings. So it is, you're right, Mr. Green Jeans. There are going to be some gun owners in the state who say, oh, I get to keep my gun, just have to register it. Okay, that's fine. There are a lot of gun owners who do not find that acceptable, who do find that as a slow motion gun ban, who say, well, why would you want me to register my firearms unless you want to take them at some future point in time? Because we don't have a gun registry in the state of Virginia. This would be the first. And I think that those folks are right to raise those questions. But the other thing that does give me hope is that it's not just this ban, right? You've got the red flag law. You've got the return of one gun a month. You've got a number of other provisions that have been introduced or will be introduced in the state of Virginia that will impact the ability of legal gun owners to exercise their rights. So even if one bill gets tweaked to make it slightly more acceptable to some portion of Virginia's gun owners, I don't see that as calming the waters completely. And everybody's saying, all right, well, we won, we can go home. I just don't think that's where the state's gun owners are at the moment. So I do hope that we continue to see the engagement and the momentum over the next few weeks. I think Democrats are playing it very smart right now. You have not heard, right? You haven't heard anything from Governor Northam, from Attorney General Mark Herring. Don McEachin has not repeated his call for the governor to use the National Guard. When that comment blew up, and that comment did blow up, I think Virginia Democrats, I suspect that Governor Northam said, okay, you guys need to stop talking about this. Session kicks off January 7th. We're going to have to start talking about it then. But we don't need people to get any more riled up than they are right now. So you just shut up about the gun control talk. All right? Because we haven't heard anything else. They've been playing it very, close to the vest since then. And I think they are hoping that the fervor dies down naturally. I just don't. And who knows? It might. That is kind of one of my concerns is that, we get together for Christmas, we get together for New Year's holidays, we kind of forget about this. But I suspect that early January, it's going to be top of mind awareness for these Second Amendment activists and Second Amendment supporters that we have seen all across the state of Virginia. All right, let's see. Couple more emails here. John checking in, talking about Virginia, specifically Tazewell County, Virginia, and the Second Amendment resolution that they've passed along with the county ordering a militia to be formed. John says this is outstanding and the first that I am aware of, correct? He says this is a very important step, could show the rest of the country and the state capital that we really do mean business here in Virginia. He says, do you think the Tazewell County will now have people headed there in mass numbers to show support and or join? John, I honestly, I don't know, because the designation that the ordering of the militia that Tazewell County is doing is to basically declare that every resident of the county is in the militia, and therefore they have the right to be trained to arms that they might have to use to defend the state of Virginia as part of their militia duties. So it's not a matter of, you, and you. You're in the militia. The rest of you, go away. Much like the sheriff in Culpeper County, Scott Jenkins, has said, if we have to, we'll deputize thousands of people here in the county. And they will be my deputies, and they will be exempt under law enforcement exemptions from these gun control laws. I think that that's actually the tack that Tazewell County is taking, because I haven't seen anything additionally from Tazewell County talking about, all right, the members of the militia are ordered to report to the courthouse square here for drill on the first Saturday of every month. It hasn't gone that far. So I suspect that other counties may take that step? Yeah, I do suspect we may see that step from other counties. I also think it is going to be, again, more of a political maneuver, at least to begin with, than anything else. Now, again, a lot of this, we're talking in hypotheticals, right? We've got bills that have been pre-filed, but we don't yet have votes that have been cast, and we don't even know what bills are coming our way because the filing deadline is not until January 17th. So again, keep in mind, and this is important to remember, we now have more than 100 Second Amendment sanctuaries in the state of Virginia, including over 80% of the state's counties. I believe 9 cities and a couple of towns as well. In fact, most of these votes have taken place already. So it's kind of easy to have this mindset of, okay, well, we're really in the thick of this. Right there, we're really only at the beginning. We really are just concluding chapter 1 of this story. Chapter 2 of this story, by the way, is more of an interlude. It's what happens now that most of these counties have voted between the start of the legislative session in early January. And the focus, I think, during that interlude is going to be really on Democrats and what they're doing. Once the legislature starts, Chapter 3, that's when the legislation starts getting put out in front of committees, votes start happening. And that is a chapter in and of it to itself. Chapter 4, when these laws go into effect, is going to be another chapter. The lawsuits that are inevitably going to be filed challenging these laws. Again, we are only at the beginning of this story. And I don't know how this story ends. I can't even tell you what happens in Chapter 3. But I do know that, again, if we don't have engaged, informed citizens who are talking to their lawmakers, not threatening them, not yelling and screaming at them, but talking to them in the hopes that they can start a conversation. If we don't have that group of engaged and informed citizens, the story is going to be a short one. And it's going to end with us losing our rights. Now, again, we are in for dark days regardless over the next few months. But I do believe that we do have the opportunity here to advance our cause and to secure our rights, even within the Commonwealth. All right, one more email here before we start to head off for the Christmas holiday break. Greg writing in says, I think that you discussed this a while back, probably on a Cam and Company on NRA TV. Is there a Second Amendment equivalent in any other country in the world? He says, we're calling for sanctuary counties and cities to support the Second Amendment, but is there any process or program like that in any other country? Does any other country, maybe Australia, even support the concept of citizens having the right to keep and bear arms? And Greg says, I think the Friday mailbag is awesome. Keep it up. Thank you for that, Greg. The answer is yes. There are a couple of constitutions that allegedly guarantee the right to possess a firearm. Mexico's constitution guarantees the right of citizens to own a firearm. Now, how easy is it to exercise that right? Pretty darn difficult. You got to go to the one gun store. I mean, if you're going to do this legally, you got to go to the one gun store in Mexico. There's one in the entire country. It's located on a military base in Mexico City. You have to undergo strict vetting by the Mexican government. And then once that happens, you are allowed to purchase. It used to be up to a 22 caliber rimfire rifle or up to a 38 caliber revolver. I believe they may have expanded that a little bit in recent years. But that's pretty much it. And again, that's in a country that supposedly guarantees the right to bear arms. Most countries don't. And you can go back to the very formation of this nation. And this is one of the things that made us different. I think it was, hang on here. I got to look and see. I always get these two confused. Federalist 43 or Federalist 46. Federalist 46. This was James Madison writing. And again, the Federalist Papers were all about, they were op-eds. They were not meant to be read necessarily hundreds of years later. They were meant to convince Americans at the time to support the Constitution. And here's one of the arguments that Madison made. All right, so Madison is talking about, his argument is, look, yes, the Constitution grants the federal government more power, a lot more power than it did. But that power is checked by the Constitution and by the people of the United States. Because if a despot ever were to rise up, there are checks and balances within this document and within the American system that would prevent that despotism from taking root. He said, quote, extravagant as the supposition is, let it be made. Let a regular army, fully equal to the resources of the country, be formed. And let it be entirely at the devotion of the federal government. And still, it would not be going too far to say that the state governments, with the people on their side, would be able to repel the danger. The highest number to which, according to the best computation, a standing army can be carried in any country does not exceed 100th part of the whole number of souls or 125th part of the number able to bear arms. He says, and then keep in mind, this is 1787. He says, so this proportion would not yield in the United States an army of more than 25 or 30,000 men. To these, he says, would be opposed a militia amounting to near 500,000 citizens with arms in their hands, officered by men chosen from among themselves, fighting for their common liberties, and united and conducted by governments possessing their affections and confidence. He says it may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumstanced could ever be conquered by such a proportion of regular troops. Those who are best acquainted with the last successful resistance of this country against the British arms will be the most inclined to deny the possibility of it. And this is the important part. This is what I was building up to. Besides the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, the existence of subordinate governments, to which the people are attached and by which the militia officers are appointed, forms a barrier against the enterprises of ambition. He says the enterprise of ambition more insurmountable than any which a simple government of any form can admit of. Notwithstanding the military establishments in the several kingdoms of Europe, which are carried as far as the public resources will bear, the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. And it is not certain, Madison wrote, that with this aid alone, they would not be able to shake off their yokes. But were the people to possess the additional advantages of local governments chosen by themselves, who could collect the national will and direct the national force, and of officers appointed out of the militia by these governments and attached both to them and to the militia, it may be affirmed with the greatest assurance that the throne of every tyranny in Europe would be speedily overturned in spite of the legions which surround it. So, in other words, even back then, America was unique. Most governments did not trust their, and in 1787, most governments were monarchies, right? Republics had a history of not lasting very long and not being very successful. And the general thinking was eventually power got consolidated in one man and a tyranny would form. And that was just sort of the way of the world. And here's Madison pointing out, listen, we are different. We are not like most of the world where the rulers don't trust the people with arms. Here in the United States, we're armed. The rulers don't have a choice. But the rulers do trust the people with arms. And the people with arms are a check on despotism. Not the only check. Not the only check. Madison wasn't an anarchist. But those people born to arms or carrying arms, in conjunction with their state governments, with their locally elected militia officers, that again, the system of checks and balances would preserve those rights of Americans to defend themselves and their countrymen against tyranny. Again, that's not some anti-government weirdo making that argument. That's James Madison. That's the father of the Constitution making that argument. So, Greg, a long story short and long answer short, we are one of the few nations to actually have that language in the Constitution, and we are the only nation to really respect it. Now, some people might say that makes the United States an anachronism. I say that's what makes the United States the United States, and that this was intentionally baked into the constitutional cake, that the Americans not be deprived of their right to keep and bear arms and not have that check on tyranny removed. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I think that we are going to say so long for a few days anyway. I do appreciate all of the emails coming in. Again, the email address, cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. We will not do this next Friday because we won't do this next Monday. Again, we're going to plan on taking next week off from the show, but the website, bearingarms.com, will have fresh content all week long. I'll see you back here Monday, December the 30th with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Thanks again for tuning in, for sharing the show, and for spreading the word. Have yourself a Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you soon here on Bearing Arms Cam and Company.